In the streets of Los Angeles in June 2025, we witnessed not merely a protest or civil unrest, but a profound manifestation of what sociologist Austin Turk identified as political criminality. The fundamental tension between those who wield authority and those who resist it, as images of federal immigration agents wearing masks and balaclavas conduct raids in Los Angeles, flood our screens and TV and social media. We see more than law enforcement. We see the embodiment of state power exercising what it perceives as legitimate authority over bodies it deems illegitimate. But there is something deeper here, something that speaks to the human spirit's eternal refusal to be diminished. We are seeing parallelism to South Central and Koreatown in 1992 and to Oakland's Black Panther movement. This video and analysis intentionally moves beyond the conventional two-party political framework that reduces complex human struggles to Republican versus Democrats, conservatives versus liberals. Instead, I examine these events through the lens of power. Who has it? How it's exercised, and how it's being challenged. By applying both sociological theory and spiritual wisdom, we can understand the recent LA ICE conflicts not as partisan political theater, but as part of humanity's ongoing struggle for dignity and justice. Through this lens, we will explore Austin Turk's theory of political criminality and how it explains the creation of criminals through authority resistance dynamics, and examine the cyclical nature of oppression and how the oligarchy maintains power through selective law enforcement. We'll also look at the spiritual dimensions of sanctuary and community defense that transcend legal frameworks, as well as the historical parallel with the Black Panther movement and the 92 LA Uprising that reveal recurring patterns of state violence and resistance. And of course, explore the sacred nature of community defense as both political and spiritual practice. This approach reveals that what we're witnessing in Los Angeles is not an aberration or a policy dispute, but the predictable functioning of systems designed to maintain hierarchies through the criminalization of both survival and solidarity. Sociologist and criminologist Austin Turk's theory of political criminality provides us with a lens to understand what we're witnessing in Los Angeles. Turk argued that crime is not simply a violation of law, but rather the product of conflict between those who have the power to make and enforce laws, the authorities, the state, and those who become subject to those laws, the subjects or the oppressed. In this framework, criminals are created through the interaction between authority and resistance. When we examine the current ICE enforcement actions in LA, we see Turk's theory playing out in real time. The federal government, wielding the authority of immigration law, designates certain human beings as illegal, not because of any criminal activity, but because of their relationship to the state power. The undocumented immigrants become criminals. Again, not through their actions, but through their very existence in a space where the state says they do not belong. The protesters who stand in solidarity, who attempt to physically stop ICE vehicles and ICE agents, become criminalized through their resistance to this authority. Hundreds of arrests have been made, not because these individuals committed crimes in the traditional sense, but because they challenged the legitimacy of the state's power to determine who belongs and who doesn't. According to Turk, this is how the cycle of oppression continues. The elite group in power creates laws, ostensibly for public order, but in reality designed to maintain their power and control over subordinate groups. These laws create inherently unfair and unlawful situations that punish marginalized communities beyond their breaking point. When people inevitably rise up to protest these unjust conditions, conflict breaks out in the heat of the moment, not because the oppressed are inherently violent, but because the system itself generates the condition for conflict. The ones in power, the authority, or the state, then deploys their agents of social control, the police, ICE, and in this case, the military and Marines, to suppress this quote-unquote resistance. This deployment of force creates further conflict, more arrests, more potential violence, which the authorities then use to justify even more quote-unquote law and order measures. In the current LA situation, we see this pattern playing out precisely. The federal government responds to protests against immigration enforcement by illegally assigning military troops to civilian law enforcement, further escalating the oppression and ensuring the cycle continues. Each turn of the cycle deepens the criminalization of resistance while legitimizing state violence. The original injustice, which was the separation of families, the utilization of militarized raids on communities, becomes obscured by the state's narrative of restoring order. The victims become the villains, and the cycle perpetuates itself through an ever-expanding apparatus of control. I would imagine that Turk, as a conflict theorist, will agree that ICE agents were assigned to California specifically due to California's historically liberal policy on immigration in order to incite conflict, cause discord, and use the incident as an excuse to exert control over California. President Trump federalized the California National Guard under Title 10, Section 12406, and had ordered 2,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines in order to quell protests in LA. The administration cited federal authority to deploy troops without state approval in case of quote-unquote rebellion, invasion, or inability to enforce U.S. laws. Legal experts have questioned Trump's use of that section of the law, and noting that a true rebellion or invasion never existed, making the legal basis weak and an overreach of federal authority. I believe something legal is happening now as during the recording of this video. The conflict escalation echoes both the military response to the Panthers and the deployment of federal troops during the '92 Uprising. This militarization is not accidental. It reflects the government's intention that immigration enforcement is fundamentally about maintaining social control, not about public safety. When the federal state deploys military force against protesters who are defending immigrant communities, it reveals that immigration law is not really about legal versus illegal behavior. It's all about power. The same system that criminalizes border crossings celebrates corporate tax avoidance. The same system that separates families for lacking documentations protects corporations that exploit these undocumented labor. Austin Turk would recognize this pattern, the selective enforcement of laws to maintain existing hierarchies while presenting that enforcement as neutral and objective. The Black Panther Party, founded in 1966 in Oakland, provides a powerful historical parallel to today's resistance movements. Like today's immigrant activists, the Panthers understood that the law was not neutral. It was a tool of oppression wielded by those in power against those seeking liberation. The Panthers had declared, "We want freedom, we want power to determine the destiny of our Black community." Today's immigrants and their allies echo this demand, the power to determine their own destiny, to exist without fear, to build communities without the constant threat of raids and deportations. The Panthers understood what Austin Turk would later theorize, that the state creates criminals through the selective enforcement of laws designed to maintain existing power structures. When the Panthers carried guns while monitoring police, they were engaging in legal activity, but they were criminalized because their actions challenged the state's monopoly of legitimate violence. The Panthers also understood the spiritual dimension of their struggle. They spoke of revolutionary love, love for their communities that was so deep it required them to risk everything to protect it. And we see this same revolutionary love in the sanctuary movement, in the protesters who face arrests to protect their neighbors, in families who risk everything to keep their children safe. The 92 LA Uprising, not merely a riot, as the media labeled it as, provides another crucial parallel. Like today's protests against ICE enforcement, the 92 Uprising was sparked by the visible exercise of state violence against marginalized communities and the system's refusal to hold the violence accountable. In both cases, we see what sociologists call moral shock, moments when the contradiction between American ideals and American reality becomes so stark that it demands a response. In 92, it was the video of Rodney King's beating and the subsequent acquittal of the officers. Today, it's the image of masked federal agents conducting military-style raids in immigrant communities. Both moments reveal the same underlying structure that Turk identified as the state's power to determine who deserves protection and who deserves punishment, who belongs and who doesn't, whose pain matters and whose doesn't. The multiracial character of both the 92 Uprising and today's immigration protests is significant. These are not isolated ethnic conflicts, but challenges to a system that oppresses multiple communities through different mechanisms. In 92, Korean American shop owners, Black residents, Latino workers, and white allies found themselves navigating the same landscape of state violence and economic marginalization. Today, allies of the immigrants are working to uphold this American ideal, envisioning America as a sanctuary for the oppressed, not the battleground of militarized borders or family separation. There's something sacred in the act of declaring sanctuary, whether it's on the Statue of Liberty welcoming immigrants, a church opening its doors, or a city declaring itself a sanctuary city, or humans linking arms to protect their neighbors from deportation. About a dozen California cities adopted formal sanctuary policies under the state's sanctuary state law. California's economy is heavily reliant on immigrants, from farmers to the elite scientists and programmers of Silicon Valley. This is not merely political resistance, it's also a spiritual affirmation of the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their documentation status. In many indigenous and spiritual traditions, the earth recognizes no borders. The Tongva people, who originally inhabited what we call Los Angeles, understood the land as sacred, belonging to no government but to the creator of all beings. When immigrants cross borders seeking safety and opportunity, they are following ancient patterns of human migration that predate any nation state. The masks worn by ICE agents become symbolic of more than operational security. They represent the dehumanization required to enforce policies that separate families and criminalize survival, much like certain uniforms. Like the masked enforcers in Netflix Squid Game, these face coverings enable systemic cruelty under the guise of just doing your job. The Stanford Prison Experiment by Zimbardo showed how quickly ordinary people can become violent enforcers under institutional or state authority. When ICE agents don masks, it erases identity, encourages dehumanization, and allows them to perform acts that would be impossible if they truly saw the humanity in those they pursue. In the spiritual traditions that have sustained oppressed communities throughout history, there is a distinction between human law and divine law, between what is legal and what is actually just. The Underground Railroad was illegal. harboring Jewish families during the Holocaust was illegal. The Boston Tea Party was illegal, but all were responses to a higher calling, the call to conscience that transcends human authority. Today's sanctuary movement stands in this tradition, transforming political resistance into something more profound. The fundamental question of whether we will allow human beings to be treated as disposable, whether we will allow families to be destroyed in service of abstract concepts like border security. P.S. I highly recommend the films The Zookeeper's Wife and Jojo Rabbit about sanctuary and what it means to stand up to authority. The Zookeeper's Wife is based on a true story during World War II. Check it out. There's something deeply sacred about community defense, the idea that we are responsible for each other's safety and dignity. This concept appears across cultures and spiritual traditions. When protesters in LA risk arrest to protect immigrant families, they're enacting these sacred principles. They're saying that no human being is illegal, that no family deserves to be torn apart, that we are all connected in ways that transcend citizenship status. Community defense threatens the state's ability to divide and control. When citizens risk arrest to protect their neighbors, they determine the system of differential rights that keep communities from uniting against oppression. Austin Turk's theory of political criminality helps us understand that what we're witnessing in Los Angeles is not aberrant. It's the normal functioning of a system designed to maintain hierarchies through the selective application of law, the criminalization of immigrants, the arrest of protesters, the deployment of military force, and the curfew. All are predictable responses when authority is challenged. But the spiritual dimensions of this struggle reminds us that resistance is not futile. The same spirit that moved Harriet Tubman, that inspired the Black Panthers, that rose up in LA in '92, lives on in today's sanctuary movement. It's the spirit that refuses to accept that any human being is disposable, that insists on our fundamental interconnectedness, that calls us to risk comfort and safety for justice. In the end, this is not really about immigration policy or law enforcement tactics. It's about the kind of society we want to be, whether it's one that oppresses or one that recognizes the sacred dignity of every human being. The protesters are asking a fundamental question: will we choose love or fear, freedom or oppression, humanity or the law that serves the state? The answer, spoken with their bodies and their willingness to risk arrest, is clear. The question now is, what will be ours as a collective? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in my next video.